The letter informing him of his inheritance was formal and to the point. No rambling or expressions of love from his uncle. Just facts. His uncle, Elias P. Crow, who he had only seen once, at a funeral when he was 7 years old, had left everything to him. The everything was a vast, crumbling Victorian estate called Whisperwood. It was located in the mist-shrouded hills of a town that Elias had never heard of before. It seemed ludicrous to Elias, a guy whose life was a well-organized spreadsheet of freelance graphic design jobs and microwaved meals. This type of thing only happened in movies, not in the life of a man whose most exciting weekly activity was remembering to bring the recycling outside. But here he was, standing in front of Whisperwood, his late uncle's house, on a bleak November afternoon. The sky was a bruised pewter color, and the air carried the scent of decaying leaves and secrets. The house loomed above him, a jumble of irregular gables and peeling paint. It looked more like a petrified forest than a building. He hesitated, and then put the key in the lock. It was heavy in his hand, a chunky iron thing that seemed to hold more weight than its size warranted. As he turned the key, it made a sound like a sigh. The door swung inward, revealing a darkness that wasn't just the absence of light, but a palpable thing, a void that seemed to suck in sound and color. Elias frowned, feeling the prickle of goosebumps on his arms. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The entry hall was cavernous, the air thick with the smell of dust and withered flowers. A shaft of sunlight managed to penetrate the gloom, illuminating motes dancing in the stillness. The silence was oppressive, like the house was holding its breath. Elias cleared his throat, his voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "Hello." His voice sounded alien to him, brittle and sharp. There was no reply except the soft thud of his own heartbeat. Days turned into a week, and Elias moved into his... He began to unearth the layers of his uncle's past, finding documents and letters hidden in books or tucked behind loose floorboards, but each piece of information only raised more questions, casting his uncle's life in a more mysterious light without providing any clear answers. The house itself was a labyrinth of dusty rooms and cobwebbed corridors. Each room he discovered added another layer to the enigma of his uncle's life. There was a nursery with a crib made of polished wood, a library filled with leather-bound volumes, and a conservatory where exotic plants clawed at the glass roof, as if trying to break free. However, it was his uncle's study that became his obsession. The room was immaculate, almost to the point of sterility. The only furniture was a large, ornately carved mahogany desk and a single, worn leather chair. On the desk sat a strange device. It was an orrery, an instrument used to show the positions and movements of celestial bodies. But instead of planets and moons, this orrery displayed a series of intricately carved spheres that were labeled with human emotions: joy, sorrow, anger, serenity. In the center of the orrery was a plain black sphere, etched with a swirling Archon symbol. Elias felt an inexplicable pull towards it, as if it held the key to some hidden understanding. Then there was the journal. He found it beneath a loose floorboard in the library, bound in aged leather, its pages filled with his uncle's spidery handwriting. The entry spoke of arcane knowledge and whispered of a reality beyond the veil of perception. One entry in particular caught his eye. It spoke of a hidden place, a place where the boundaries between realities were thin. The entry ended abruptly, the last sentence reading, "The key lies where shadows dance and whispers linger." It was the cryptic message in his uncle's will. Elias had dismissed it as the rambling of a senile old man. But now, armed with the knowledge gleaned from the journal, he saw it differently. The key to his uncle's final sphere. What if Whisperwood wasn't just a house? What if it was a conduit to those alternate realities his uncle had written about? The thought was preposterous, yet the idea took root in Elias's mind, growing like a weed in fertile soil. The next morning, armed with a journal and a flashlight, Elias descended into Whisperwood's basement. The basement was unlike the rest of the house. It was warm, brightly lit, and smelled faintly of lemon polish. The far wall was lined with old suitcases, each one a silent sentinel guarding forgotten secrets. As he examined them, one caught his attention. It was smaller than the others, made of a sturdier material and had a peculiar brass lock. Elias ran his fingers over its surface, feeling a thrill shoot through him. This was the lock from the door in the basement. Could this be the key to the hidden place his uncle had written about? With trembling hands, he inserted the key. It fit perfectly. The basement was cold, the air heavy with the scent of damp earth. As he descended, the sound of dripping water echoed around him. At the end of the stairs, he found a door made of solid iron, its surface adorned with strange symbols that seemed to writhe under his gaze. A sense of foreboding washed over him, yet he pushed open the door, stepping into the unknown. The room he entered was bare, its walls stark and gray. The only feature of interest was a single unadorned wooden box in the center of the floor. Elias approached it cautiously, feeling a mix of trepidation and excitement. What secrets did this box hold? What answers would it provide? He reached out and touched the box, and in that instant, everything shifted. The room dissolved around him, replaced by the familiar surroundings of his own living room. It was messy, just as he had left it. Clothes strewn across the sofa, dishes piled in the sink. But something was different. A photo on the mantelpiece caught his eye. It was a picture of him and his parents, but the woman's face had been carefully erased from the photograph. He stared at the blank space, his mind reeling. Was this an alternate reality as his uncle had described? Had he traveled through time? But the biggest shock awaited him in the mirror. Iruset Dwight, his reflection staring back at him, was not his own. It was the face of his father, young, vibrant, full of life. Panic seized him. What had he stumbled upon? How could he return to his own reality? He raced through the house, desperate to find an answer, a clue, anything that could explain what was happening. He found it in his uncle's study. The Ori was glowing faintly, and the central sphere seemed to pulse with an inner light. He reached out, and as his fingers touched the arcane symbol, a vision flooded his mind. He saw his uncle, younger, more vibrant, standing in a room identical to the one he was in. His uncle turned, and their eyes met. Elias recoiled in shock. The man in the vision was himself. It was a vision of his own past, a glimpse into a life he had never known. Suddenly, it all made sense. His uncle hadn't been a recluse or a madman. He had been traveling the world, seeking, searching, and he had left Whisperwood, the nexus of realities, to Elias, hoping his nephew would carry on his work. But why? Why had he erased his mother's face from the photograph? Why had he kept these realities hidden? The answers, Elias realized, lay in the past, in the memories he had never had. He knew what he had to do. He had to journey through the Orrery, follow his uncle's path, explore the realities he had uncovered. It was a daunting task, but one he was compelled to undertake. He placed his hand on the Ori once more, bracing himself for the journey ahead. As the world shifted around him, he felt a sense of purpose, of destiny. This was not just a quest for knowledge or understanding. It was a quest for identity, a search for the missing pieces of his soul. He was no longer just Elias, the introverted graphic designer. He was Elias, the traveler of realities, the seeker of truth, and his journey had only just begun. If you are familiar with the notion that we only utilize a tiny percentage of our brain as overall capacity, then it stands to reason that there are probably just as many facets of our lives that we do unthink about, or ignore, because we do unthink they re significant enough to be worth thinking about. We simply allow them to drift past us without giving them any thought at all. People like Elias P. Crow are frequently characterized as having leaden lives, yet they are far from being stupid. In fact, these individuals often possess intellects that are both razor-sharp and adept at problem-solving. They are the kinds of individuals who graduate from prestigious institutions, secure positions with prestigious firms, and go home to live in condos that are located in downtown business districts. This is where they spend the majority of their time, either at work or at home. However, occasionally these people come to the realization that, despite the fact that they have everything they ever desired, their existence is devoid of meaning. Their minds begin to feel constricted, as though they were slowly but surely being reduced to the size of the sterile apartment or office cubicle that surrounds them. When we look around us, we start to feel as though we are nothing more than a collection of accomplishments and possessions. The entire globe appears to us to be nothing more than a large performance, in which everyone is competing against one another in order to be the smartest, the wealthiest, and the most successful. We find ourselves caught in a never-ending cycle of working, spending, acquiring, maintaining, and advancing professionally. Even while we maintain the appearance of being alive, we lead lifeless lives. People such as Elias P. Crow find themselves in situations like this, where it seems as though the finest years of their lives are slipping away from them like sand through their fingers, and all they have to show for their efforts is a little pile of worthless stuff. This is where the idea of self-discovery comes into play. The protagonist goes on a trip that takes them away from the familiarity of their everyday lives and into previously unexplored territory. During this journey, they are confronted with challenges that force them to confront their deepest fears and insecurities. As a result of these trials, they learn more about themselves and develop into stronger, wiser people. Elias, the story's protagonist, is the kind of person we've been discussing. He's a man whose life is in desperate need of direction. His heart is heavy with a sense of foreboding and regret for a life that feels empty and unfulfilling. His actions are driven by the desire to discover a solution to a problem that he hasn't been able to put into words. He knows instinctively that the sterile existence he's been leading isn't right for him, but he's not sure what to do about it. He needs to get away, and he does, traveling across country in search of inspiration. The story follows Elias during the several weeks of his exploration, when he finds himself on the verge of going completely insane. During his travels, he comes across an old abandoned mansion known as which becomes his home away from home. Inside the home, he discovers a basement containing a bewildering array of 12 doors, each of which leads to a unique universe where Elias has led a completely different life. There is a door labeled Joy, which he pushes open to find himself standing on a podium accepting a Pulitzer Prize for photography, a field that he had given up on after graduating from college. Rajan is immediately transported to a boardroom where he screams at a multitude of people who have no faces. He was strong and terrible. He touched serenity and found himself sitting on a distant lakeside, fishing, and his mind was entirely silent. Each door represented a life that he might have lived, a route that he chose not to follow, and a decision that was never made. It was not the ghosts of the deceased that haunted the home. Rather, it was the ghosts of his own future possibilities. Elias soon realizes that the house is not dangerous, despite the fact that it was Lovecraftian and strange in nature. The actual threat comes from the doors themselves, which represent the many paths that life can take, and each path leads to a world where Elias is happy, healthy, and prosperous. The fact that the doors existed was not the stunning truth. It was the amount of money they cost. With each visit, he started to see that a little portion of the real world was disappearing. The colors of the wallpaper, which was flaking away, seemed to be less vibrant than before. Flat was the best way to describe the flavor of his coffee. The many options that were available to him were causing his own reality to become dark, and as a result, he was beginning to lose his anchor. The message that his uncle had written took on a new and terrifying significance. Perception is the most important thing to consider. Reality is represented by the lock. At long last, he came to a full understanding of the genuine inheritance. The home was not the source of the problem. It was a matter of decision. He has the option of remaining where he is. It was within his power to choose one of those flawless, prefabricated lifestyles. He could be the renowned photographer, the parent who is devoted to his children, or the fisherman who is at peace. He could live a wonderful lie forever. Alternatively, he might just pack up his things and go, shut the basement door for all eternity, and go back to his existence, which was full of uncertainties, disorganization, and misery, but was still his reality. A life filled with spreadsheet fears and misgivings about his artistic abilities, but a life that was really and truly his own. On one particular evening, he found himself standing in front of the orrery, his palm lingering over the joy sphere. That standing ovation was an experience that was exhilarating. After that, he turned his gaze to the dusty, quiet, and majestic ruin that was the truth that his uncle had left him with was this: rather than serving as a fiction to escape into, it is a means of comprehending the significance of his own life. Elias did not make a selection between the doors, demonstrating a determination that he himself found surprising. He discovered a sledgehammer in a tool shed in lieu of what he was looking for. He made his way down into the basement, not for the purpose of opening a door, but rather to break the mechanism that was responsible for opening and closing the entrance. He continued to swing at the white door, the black door, and all the other doors until they were nothing more than splinters. The hallway itself began to tremble and disintegrate, eventually turning into a basement made of stone walls that was frigid and had little more than a basic fuse box. He returned to the study, where he wrapped the ori in a cloth and then put it inside a chest. After that, he shut the chest. Whisperwood was not sold by Elias Picro. He made the decision to move in. The initial investment was substantial, but the results were even greater. He began with a single canvas, setting his intention to fill it with color and texture. After that, he embarked on the extended, gradual, and fulfilling task of restoring it, not to its previous splendor, but to something quite different. His life was no longer a spreadsheet, but rather a narrative that he was in the process of creating for himself. Every day was an opportunity to create a new chapter, and he was determined to make the most of it, even if it meant embracing imperfections and the reality of living in a small town. Without a doubt, the secret that the mansion was hiding was very startling. However, the most important lesson it taught was even more profound. The most dreadful jail is not a life of adversity, but rather a paradise that belongs to someone else, or some other version of your own fabrication. Furthermore, the most powerful decision one can make is not to strive for an ideal life, but rather to choose to take ownership of the imperfect life that one now has. This is the story of how a man came to the realization that the greatest adventure of all is the one that can only be found in the depths of one's own soul. The grandest vistas are those that may be seen from the comfort of one's own home. The most epic journeys start with a single step, and the most beautiful works of art are those that start with a single stroke of the artist's brush on the canvas. The hero doesn't always have to travel to a faraway land. The changes that will define their destiny can occur right where they are, whether they choose to embrace them or not. Thank you so much for watching. Please leave a comment below with your thoughts on the video and subscribe for more content like this in the future.